welcome or welcome back to BookTube with Amy. Today I'm going to be doing the philosophy of reading tag, and I was tagged in this by Nellie Scott over at Gunpowder Fiction and Plot, who are some of my BookTube besties. They're amazing, so go check them out if you haven't already subscribed. They're completely hysterical, usually thought-provoking, and sometimes just downright nonsense, and they are great. I think for me it's definitely character. If I don't enjoy any of your characters in your books, or I don't care about them, I don't even need to like them, I could hate them, and like as long as they make me feel an emotion and I'm connected in some way, then I'm grand. If I'm reading a book and I'm not connecting to any of the characters, I don't really care about them, I feel like they aren't being developed, then I just don't enjoy the book, and that's usually when it turns out to be a DNF or a 1 star. I need there to be some really good character development. I need to feel like the characters are, you know, real people, or I just check out and I'm not interested. I definitely think so. I think that if you surround yourself with people that only have the same opinions and viewpoints as you, and you only read literature or watch news broadcasts or TV shows of people who have the same opinions as you, then you know you're never going to be challenged and you're never going to see the other side of the coin. I think that, you know, debates are healthy and you don't need to agree with everybody, with the exception that, you know, bigotry's bigotry. And that is just a line. We don't tolerate any form of that, and that isn't an opinion, it is bigotry and it is hate speech, so like that's not included here. I think that, you know, debate and conversation is the only way that we can move forward and we can progress and make change as a society. So I think that although it is comfortable and more natural for us as humans to seek out, you know, the affirmation of people who agree with us, that sometimes we do need to push the boundary and talk to someone or read something that does disagree with us. Anything that is in any way, you know, bigoted or making out that people don't deserve the same human rights based on a protected characteristic is not what we're on about. But I definitely, people who have different, you know, political opinions, different religious beliefs, even just different opinions on books, sometimes I think is good. So I think that people should read books that they maybe disagree with, and you never know, it could, you know, change their mind on something or make them just think a wee bit differently. And as people, we evolve over time, and I think that the content that we choose to consume should also evolve and not just necessarily with what you agree with. I don't really feel like this is a question. Like, as tech advances, it is just easier for me to buy books and have them delivered to my house. Now, I have done this in the past. There have been like maybe a couple of books where I've enjoyed one person's perspective more than the other person's perspective, if they're multi-POV, and I will like skim over the POV that I am least interested in, and I think that that's absolutely fine. You know, I'm not going to put my effort into something if I don't feel like I'm going to get a good return. Like, and it's how I choose to spend my free time, and I read for fun, so if I am not having fun, then I am going to skim read, and I think that that is alright. I think that if it gets to a point where you are skim reading an entire book, then it should probably just be a DNF. But I think if you're maybe skim reading certain parts of it, or like I say, a certain perspective, I think that that's fine. But if like you start a book and you're like, this isn't for me, and you just decide to skim read the full thing, then just DNF it, cause why waste your time? Like, there is no need. But I think that people should read books however they want to read books, and if, you know, they're a bit of a completionist and they don't like to DNF, so they'll feel better skim reading, makes no odds to me. If, you know, you didn't want to skim read an entire book and you want to DNF it, cool for me too. I think it depends on how you class it being enjoyable. Like, I've read some pretty harrowing books, and although I've like sat and been sobbing the entire time I've been reading them, like, I've still taken something away from that book, whether it's another person's story or, you know, learning about somebody else's struggle, learning about another culture, or learning a wee bit about history, I've still taken something away from it, and therefore that's been enjoyable to me. I don't think that every book should be like a rip-roaring romp, but that's just based on my reading preferences. I quite like a serious book or a sad book, so like that might not be enjoyable to other people. Some people might just want, you know, rainbows and unicorns and butterflies, and so reading, you know, a book about drug addicts dying might not be their cup of tea, and that is absolutely fine. It doesn't mean it's not mine. But I don't think it always needs to be necessarily enjoyable. I really enjoy a book where it makes me a bit uncomfortable, whether that is, you know, social commentary that makes me feel a wee bit uncomfortable, whether it's horror that is, you know, pushing the boundaries so hard that it's making my stomach turn as I am reading it, or something that is, you know, pushing the boundaries of what my brain deems as conventional, that it is challenging my thinking and my feelings on certain characters. That to me is also enjoyable. So I think that that element of being uncomfortable and a book making you feel these things is enjoyable to me, but it might not be to everybody. Somebody else, you know, maybe doesn't want to hear about people being chained up by their feet and gutted, but like, I'm fine with it. So this is a really interesting conversation, and Scott and Nell made some really interesting points about it as well. I think that it totally depends on what you deem to be well read. So if you take me and Simon side by side in comparison, like in terms of quantity, I read a lot more than Simon does. So then would I be considered more well read because I read more? And then when you think about like the genres of books that we read, so I read like YA fantasy predominantly, and he reads like crime fiction and political memoir predominantly. So then his are more highbrow and, you know, more almost socially acceptable to an extent. So would he be considered more well read because of the type of book that he chooses to read? It's just really interesting. I think that it would depend on the person's description of well read. I read quite a lot of different books out with YA fantasy. I read classics sometimes, I read some literary fiction sometimes, I read high fantasy, I read horror, I read comedy. I read quite a lot, so I don't know if I would be considered to be well read. I feel like there is an element of pretension when it comes to books, and that depending on what genre some people read, they would be considered well read. And I feel like there is a whole community on BookTube as well, where like they almost test you to see what you've read and what you haven't read, to see if you can be part of their crew. And it's almost like if you read anything that they don't consider to be, you know, a serious or challenging book, then you're sort of feel like knowing their cool gang. And like, it's so fucking pretentious, right? Because a book's a book, and if I want to read a book about fairies and, you know, like just have a good time with it, it's no different for you wanting to read a book about Russian war camps. Like, absolutely no different at all. You know, there are some things that are tackled in YA fantasy that I feel that are handled a lot better in YA fantasy than I've seen in some literary fiction that I've read. Likewise, I think that there are some literary fiction books that deal with topics that are a lot better than non-fiction books that I've read. So I think it really depends on what you class as being well read, but like, it really irks me when people categorise booktubers or readers based on the genre of books that they tend to read. I think that, you know, if you read YA fantasy, then you're sort of like a 20-something-year-old lassie, and like everybody's content's the same, and you know, like you are just that type of person. And if you read classics, you're somehow sort of feel like middle class and a bit boring, and like that's just not the case. Like, books are out there. I think that they are more accessible these days than they probably ever have been in terms of the amount of avenues that you can get them down. You know, we've got social media now, which is great as well, so if you can't afford to spend money on books, there's like swap pages that you can join so that you can swap the books that you've read for new ones that you potentially haven't. And I just think that everybody needs to stop being so pretentious about it and, you know, let go of this well-read thing. I am a reader. I don't consider myself well-read or not. I just consider myself a reader. I consider myself a mood reader, which means I read what I like, and I think that that's the best way to have fun with it for me. If I set myself challenges or TBRs or force myself into reading something, I don't enjoy it. So therefore that's the type of reader that I am, as opposed to whether I am well read or not. I just hate the sort of element of pretension in it, and like almost the judgment that someone can be reading the wrong type of books. Fuck that. Like, books are books. Like what you like, read what you want to. That's it. My book buying process is buy as much as possible, as often as possible, and then also buy Simon some books so that he can't moan about the amount of books that I buy myself. And it's uncanny because I feel like that is also Simon's book buying process, so it's fine. I don't really have a process, to be honest with you. I have a huge Amazon wish list, and basically any book that I see or hear about that I fancy reading, it goes into my Amazon wish list. And then it's basically there just so that I can have a physical track of all the books I want to purchase. I don't always necessarily purchase them from Amazon. Like I say, we do a lot of charity shop book hauls. We haven't done one in ages. I think the last one we did was away last year at some point. Maybe last like November time or something. So we have one planned for the end of April, which I'm really excited about. But I'll just go out, I'll have a nosy, I'll see what I see, I'll buy what I like. I don't really have like a formal process. I know that some people are dead strict and they're like, I'll only buy a book when like I've read this many in my physical, or I don't, I really don't. In terms of what I choose to buy, I try to have a bit of a mix in genre. On my wish list there's like literally a mix of everything. There's some classics on there I want to read, there's horror, there's YA fantasy, there's high fantasy, there's just some quirky books, literary fiction, there's a bit of everything. And I try to be conscious of the books that I have on my shelf in terms of their diversity. Not only do I want them to be diverse in genre, but I also want them to be quite diverse in terms of gender, in terms of you know, author's nationality, in terms of having queer authors on my shelf, and I take that into consideration when I buy books as opposed to when I choose to read books, because like I say, I'm a mood reader, so I try to buy diversely so that I can then read diversely when the time comes. I really enjoy a reread. I think that there's something comforting about it, and I've spoken on the channel before, but like I suffer with anxiety so much, and so I think that there is just something nice about picking up a book and knowing the story it's going to tell me and knowing that I'm going to have a good time with it. So like when my anxiety gets really bad, I'll tend to reread a couple of books, just because I feel like that helps my mental health a wee bit, and like at least there will be one element in my life that I will not be anxious about, even if it's just knowing that I'm going to enjoy this book and that I'm going to have fun with it. And it feels also like I'm sort of hanging out with my pals if it's a book that I've really connected to the characters with. So I am grand with rereads. I think that they're great, and I also count a reread towards my Goodreads goal. I know that some people don't, but I do, because I have still consumed that book regardless of how many times I have previously consumed it. I am fine with DNFing. I think that it's something that I've got better with over time. I used to read about 100 pages of a book before I would choose to DNF it. But there were books sometimes that I knew far earlier, like I was just not going to enjoy this and it wasn't going to get better, and I had maybe looked at the reviews and people were saying similar things to me. But I persevered to the 100-page mark so that I felt less guilty about DNFing it. And then last year I was like, right, I'm scrapping that and I'm going to go down to 50. And then now I'm at the point where I sometimes don't even give a book 50 pages. I think that I have read a lot, and documenting my reading journey on BookTube has been really helpful to try and help me discern what I like and what I don't like, because I've been actively tracking it and I've been more reflective on what I've been reading so that I can give you guys, you know, some semblance of thoughts. So I think that's been really good, and the time to have reflected on stuff a wee bit more means that I can now tell quite early on in a book whether it's something that I'm going to get on board with or not, which means I'm quicker to DNF, which is great. Now, I actually haven't DNF'd a book so far this year, which is amazing, but I don't shy away from DNFing a book, and if I DNF a book, I'm really honest about it and I talk about it in my wrap-ups. I'll tell you exactly why I DNF'd it, and you know, then it's up to you whether or not you choose to read that or not. I know that some people love like a polarising book, but equally, if somebody else has DNF'd something, it doesn't necessarily put me off reading it if I think the premise sounds more up my street, because it's also personal and subjective. But no, I am fine with DNFing. I do think that the author's personal life matters when you are picking up their books, because you're choosing to support that creator, and you know, there's been so much BookTube drama and just drama in general about certain authors over the past couple of years, either putting forward on their platforms opinions that people don't disagree with, or actively spreading misinformation on their platforms, or making choices that readers have disagreed with. And I think personally it's absolutely fine to choose not to support those authors anymore. And you know, it is again a personal thing. Some people can separate the author from their works completely and just focus on the book, and if the book is good, great. It doesn't mean that the author needs to be a good person. I unfortunately am just no one of those people. I, you know, really hold my authors that I choose to read and promote on this channel to account, and you will never see me promoting, you know, a J.K. Terflin book. You'll never see me promoting a Neil Gaiman book. I've, you know, spoke about those two quite a lot. Equally, you'll now never see me promote a Graham Masterton book, because he is just ridiculously transphobic, and there's some authors that I spoke about in my unhaul recently as well that I also will no longer promote on this channel. I think that people need to be really careful how they use their platforms, and if they choose to use their platforms to spew abuse or hate or bigotry, then I will not support those authors. Likewise, in the case of Neil Gaiman, if you flout COVID restrictions because you fancy it and you're a millionaire, then I'm not going to support you, and I think that that is fine and that is valid. It doesn't mean that you don't need to support Neil Gaiman just because I've chosen not to support Neil Gaiman. But I've spoke about quite a few times on the channel before as well, I'm an advocate for positive consumerism, and I really do believe that we can make change by what we choose to consume and who we choose to support. And so if an author has misused their platform, or they have done something personally that I really strongly disagree with, then I won't buy their book and I won't support them. Doesn't mean that other people won't choose not to. Other people might support them. It would probably be YA fantasy. It is what I read predominantly most of. It's what I have read since I was in high school. It's something that has just always stayed with me. There's something just magical about it. There's something about like another race of people or another world that I don't know about, and the people have like magical abilities that just gets me going. Like I'm like, oh my god, take me to this world. So like I'm here for it. And like I say, I feel like a lot of YA fantasy, especially these days, I've noticed that with newer YA fantasy as opposed to older YA fantasy, but they sometimes deal with really hard hitting topics, and so you can get just as much of an emotional impact or an educational impact from YA fantasy sometimes, just as much as you could from a literary fiction book. And I feel like there's so many different subgenres of YA fantasy. You know, you get YA grimdark, you get you know, dark academia, so I feel like you can get sort of a wee horror-y elements for different YA books as well, which we know I'm here for. So I would definitely be YA fantasy. Sorry, Chuck Palahniuk. I don't think that everybody should read. I think that It's great that people who do read enjoy it, but again it comes down to that pretension thing, and I don't think that because I am a reader I am any more educated than anybody else. I think that there are so many different mediums these days that a story can be told through, whether that is gaming or whether that is through TV shows or whether it is through movies, and I don't feel like you need to necessarily only get enjoyment through reading. There are other avenues that you can have a story told to you through, and I think that it is fine to also be passionate about those other avenues. And you know, there's some film that's highbrow, there's some TV shows that are quite highbrow, and I'm sure within those areas there are also an element of pretension. But no, I don't think that everybody needs to read. I mean, it would be great if everybody did. I think that people in the wee corner of BookTube that I am part of are really supportive, and you know, they read really diversely and really challenge each other's opinions and views, which I think is great. But that's not to say that that doesn't also happen in communities where people are really passionate about film and really passionate about TV shows. It's just that I'm not a part of them, and therefore I am not seeing those conversations take place, but it doesn't mean that they aren't happening. And I think that for me, reading is purely enjoyment. You know, I do this as a hobby, I read as a hobby. This is not a job for me. And I'll just read whatever I like because of that. And I think that people should just do what they like to do. And so if, you know, they play 187 hours of Skyrim but they take away a really good story from it, then that's fine. You know, there's things like D&D as well, where you can make up your own story and, you know, you're playing as part of a group, which is cool. I have a game called Gloom, which I thoroughly enjoy, and basically you get a family, and the object of the game is that you make up your own story to try and kill your family first, and whoever kills your family first in the most gruesome way and gets like the most points wins. That sounds really dark and twisted, but it's great. And you know, me and Simon play that a lot, but then we're telling each other a story as we're doing it. And aye, there's just so many other avenues these days in which storytelling is important that I don't think it really necessarily matters if people are readers or not. So I don't think that everybody needs to read, but it's obviously something that I enjoy. I feel like this has been a really long, rambly one, but I guess it just is what it is. Thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you're enjoying everything that you're reading at the moment, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye!